Welcome, everybody, to the Oil and Gas Workers Association podcast. My name is Matt Cody, and joining us today, State Representative Brooks Landgraf, District 81 out of Odessa, Texas. Brooks, thank you for being here with us.
Hey, Matt, thanks for the invitation. Good to be with you. I appreciate it.
Certainly. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about the Energy Independence Act that you introduced.
Well, sure. Actually, able to get that passed on the floor of the Texas House of Representatives last week. And in a nutshell, what it does is it says that, look, Texas does a really good job of producing oil and gas, where we take a lot of pride in being the best in the country. And I think you and I can agree, and I think so many others in the Permian Basin can agree, we do it better than anybody in the free world. And but we also have a really good and predictable regulatory environment here in Texas, between the legislature, between the Railroad Commission. We have a really good safety record, and we have a good way of making sure that the industry is doing everything it's supposed to in order to effectively produce oil and gas, but also to make sure that people and the environment are being taken care of. Now, that's not to say that we're perfect, but I think we do a pretty good job. And I think we have a much better track record with handling oil and gas than Washington does. And so, just be very candid with the new administration coming in, and an administration and a political party that's been talking a lot about a Green New Deal and having restrictions on oil and gas production. I wanted to pass a bill here in Texas that says, if the federal government tries to come in and regulate or overregulate oil and gas production, the state of Texas is not going to assist the federal government in that effort unless it's a law that we already have on the books here in Texas. So it's a way of saying, hey, look, DC, look, President Biden, we've got it under control here. We're doing just fine. Thank you very much. We can take care of ourselves the way that we've been taking care of ourselves for quite some time. So you just let us do our thing, and we'll be in good shape. So that's really what the Texas Energy Independence Act does. As I mentioned, we got it passed out of the Texas House of Representatives, and it's being considered over in the Texas Senate right now.
And in fact, it passed the Texas House with 110 out of the 150 votes.
Right. No, we had broad support for it. I think folks recognize what a good job we do here in Texas and want to see us continue to prosper in that way.
Certainly. And you mentioned the Green New Deal. We've seen states and cities try to enact this Green New Deal on a smaller level. They're inching in. And I saw one article where you had said that they're coming after our livelihoods. They're coming after everything that we love and that we support. Go more into how the federal government and how states and cities are trying to enact parts of the Green New Deal on a smaller level.
Yeah, well, it's really disappointing to see, but there's a disconnect. I mean, even here in Texas, I'm starting to see it where, unless you live or work in the oil patch like we do,
right?
Even folks in Houston and Dallas who benefit tremendously, either directly or indirectly from the oil and gas industry, they don't see that. They don't understand where so much of the wealth in Texas is generated, and how many livelihoods in places like the Permian Basin are dependent upon a thriving oil and gas industry. And so, if we're starting to struggle with that here in Texas, think about how that's true in other parts of the country. I mean, that's why you have, folks like AOC, just talking about, how good the Green New Deal is. And then when she gets called out for, how that would have an impact on hardworking families, that was the last thing, that she was thinking about, is that this is really connected to people. So, not only is energy production the backbone of the Texas economy, and I would argue a very large part of the American economy. People just want to buy into the hype on that environmentalists have been peddling for generations now, and forget that there is a real world connection that we do what we do in this country. We're able to do what we're able to do in this country because we have a strong domestic energy industry, and that allows for so many other sectors of our economy to thrive. But then also there are people, who are able to pay the rent, pay a mortgage, right, and buy groceries for their family because of this industry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish that.
No. That's it. But not everybody understands that, because I think that hype machine has been put into overdrive for really at least a generation now, probably longer than that, where people are able to, especially coastal elites, are able to they're able to forget about all of that as they attack the industry, and then also drive a vehicle or fly a jet that depends on fossil fuels to be able to get around. So you hate to see it. It's really sad to see. And I think that's why I see it as my role as a policymaker from the oil patch to make sure that folks are educated and understand the importance of what we do, because so much of what they do is dependent on us.
That right there is one of the key words. We fight an education battle in this country. And whenever you were talking about how much of our economy that oil and gas is the backbone of, in 2015, we were talking about 8% GDP. It grows. One of the disconnects that I think we have is that the people who talk about our schools being underfunded then advocate for killing an industry that supports so much of the school funds.
No, and Matt, we're seeing that here at the Capitol too. Anytime I see a proposal that would, try to curb oil and gas production, the first thing that I say is, all right, well, this is how much you're going to underfund school children here in Texas, or how much money that's going to take away from the University of Texas system or the Texas A&M University system that generates a lot of revenue off of oil and gas production on university lands all across West Texas. Trying to close that, trying to connect all the dots, and showing that to people, it does change the equation for them almost immediately. But I'm just disappointed that we have to continue talking about that. But as long as that education needs to be provided, I'm going to help provide it. But no, so much of what we do here in Texas, including public education funding, is reliant on revenue that's generated in the oil patch, and that's something that we cannot forget as a state.
Certainly. Now, I told you I wanted to talk about the Biden border crisis and how it impacts our oil and gas jobs. Please go into that from what you're seeing as a legislator.
Yeah, well, it's there's very little in this world that's not interconnected, and we can see the impact of bad policy in one area can trickle into something else. As far as the Biden border crisis is concerned, I think that connection is even more true just because so much of our oil and gas production, at least in Texas, is occurring in places, whether it's in the Permian Basin or whether it's down in the Eagle Ford. It's all in the broader border region, and that's true even going into the portion of the Permian Basin that's in New Mexico. And so we have to be mindful of that. It seems like there's starting to be a little bit of a correction taking place in Washington, but I've talked with members from our federal delegation who are dealing more specifically with the border crisis. There are going to be there are and will continue to be after effects of some of the Biden policies that were changed immediately upon his taking office back on January 20th. So how long we're going to be dealing with this, I'm not sure, but we've already seen, with folks being housed in man camps that were originally set up for workers in the oil and gas industry. Yes. I mean that's a pretty clear example of how how these two things are going to be related moving forward. So it's something that we have to account for, no question.
And where the Biden administration's priorities are. I know that Vice President Harris still hasn't visited the border. And that shows us where her priorities are as well. And I've heard some excuses that it's related to COVID restrictions or COVID fears. And I also know that Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden visited Houston right after they were inaugurated to celebrate. And I'm pretty sure we had coronavirus restrictions back then.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak directly, to that, but there have been a lot of places where the president or the vice president have been able to go, in the midst of a pandemic. To me, and again, I'm just kind of speaking as a citizen here. I don't have any direct information, but it seems like it's just a convenient excuse to avoid having to confront the truth on the border.
It does. Just wrap up here, you mentioned earlier the great relationship between the Texas legislature and the Railroad Commission of Texas. And all three commissioners that we have are just outstanding people and really have worked to sustain the industry, protect the environment, and also protect American workers, just like our Texas legislature has. The Biden administration was recently willing to lift sanctions on Iran's oil industry in exchange for a nuclear deal that Iran has never followed, and Trump was probably right to pull us out of. Why do people not get the disconnect between President Biden's climate change and transition away from the oil industry promises to his base in America and his willingness to lift sanctions on Iran's really irresponsible oil industry? Is it, again, just the education battle we fight?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. But the other thing is that I think, and you hit the nail on the head, Matt. I mean, he's just playing to a political base. He knows he's got the AOC wing of the party that's hanging out there. And for whatever reason, I mean, they bought hook, line, and sinker into some of these Green New Deal policies and proposals. And so it's a way to pander to a political base. But in doing that, you ignore the reality of, not only what our energy needs are, but also the geopolitical realities of doing business with countries like Iran, who I think we can all agree don't have America's best interests at heart. And so, I mean, to me, what that really signifies is it exposes the hypocrisy of some of these policies. I mean, and I guess if you're looking for a silver lining, and I try to in a situation like this, I think it also means that deep down, at least I would like to hope that President Biden's been around long enough to know that look, this country is in part built on fossil fuels, and we have to continue to do that. So I guess what I'm hoping is that on one hand, he's trying to pander to the Green New Deal crowd and to those extremists. But the reality is that he understands what we have to do to produce the energy that we need in this country. And so, hopefully when push comes to shove, he'll make the right decision. I don't know that we can ever count on that to happen, but I think what you're talking about, Matt, does expose the hypocrisy on the left between trying to pander to an extreme part of the base and then having a foreign policy that doesn't compute with that extremist view.
And I'm glad you use the word extremist, so often in this country. So I never want to say this in sequence, like I agree with Joe Biden, but I will say that he is right when he says we do need to unify and come together. And that's one of the things that you have always been so good about in representing District 81 is that you represent not just Republicans, you represent your entire base. And I believe we all need to come together in this country around sensible policies that impact all of our jobs, and that includes the oil and gas industry. Mm-hmm. Just to wrap up, what can you say to that?
Well, no, I mean, I think, I still do believe that there are, there's common ground, and now I do have, sincerely held and very deep conservative political principles and convictions, but I think that there are ways to move forward without having to sacrifice any of those principles or convictions to find solutions. And what you've talked about within the oil and gas industry, like, for example, when it comes to, making sure that we have a safe environment for folks who work in the oil patch, that's something that the industry should want. That's something that everybody should want for those workers. And it's certainly something that the workers and their families want to have. And so, those are areas where, it's pretty, pretty easy to rally around, some of those causes, but the same can be true for, when we're looking at, I'll tell you who's done a better job of mitigating, carbon emissions has been the industry itself, without being prompted to do so by the government. And that's opened up a lot of opportunities and a lot of new employment opportunities to be, quite candid. I mean, the largest solar farms in the 4 counties in the Permian Basin that I operate are owned by oil and gas companies, so this innovation is taking place, and is being rewarded in the private sector. I think it's just another good example of how we don't need to be looking for solutions from the state when the private sector, when industry and free enterprise are able to take care of those for the most part by themselves.
Absolutely. always one to listen to other opinions and never one to compromise your values. I appreciate you joining us today.
Hey, Matt, thanks for the invitation. Always good to be with you, and appreciate what you're doing here, and being such a good voice for the hardworking men and women in the oil and gas industry. They're voices that need to be heard, and you're amplifying them in a really good way here.
We appreciate you. Everybody, State Representative Brooks Landgraf, thanks again for joining us. Thank y'all for joining the Oil and Gas Workers Association podcast. We'll see you next time.